All right, who can Canada collect tax from? Or from whom can Canada collect tax? Well, there's two buckets of people in the world. One are residents of Canada, as far as the Act is concerned. There are two buckets. And there are non-residents of Canada. If you are a resident of Canada, the income which is subject to tax in Canada, to Canadian tax, meaning like all the rules that we have learned about coming up with your income, once you come up with that number in Canada, you are subject to that. Let's do red because it's Canada, your worldwide income. So wherever you earn it in the world, if you're a resident of Canada, Canada can tax it. If you are a non-resident, Canada has the right to tax you on the income that you earn in Canada, Canadian source income. Okay? So obviously the question then becomes for every individual, am I a resident of Canada? And basically, is the Income Tax Act going to think that it has the right to tax me? And what this comes down to, again, we're back in the land of case law, but this basically comes down to, do you have a continuing state of relationship with Canada? That's right. So, are you dating Canada? Is Canada your one and only? Are you seeing Canada to the exclusion of all other countries? Then yes, you are a resident of Canada as far as the Income Tax Act is concerned. Okay, and what does this come down to? Well, this really comes down to where your stuff is. So where are your house? Where do you live? Where do you lay your head at night? Where is your family? Where is your property? And then where are these things that we call ties? Not the ones that men wear around their necks, but where are your economic ties? Although I guess those ties would fit in as property, wouldn't they? And where are your social ties? Okay, you answer those questions, and if Canada keeps coming up over and over, you're a resident of Canada. Okay, so actually in the textbook they give us this list that we can look at, and just to note that this is from an IT bulletin, and basically it goes in order. So we have your significance first, so there's your house, there's your family, then the secondary ones are property, social ties, economic ties, all the things we talked about. You'll notice that your passport is relevant, but citizenship does not tell you where you're resident. So you can be a Canadian resident, absolutely be a Canadian resident, a Canadian citizen, and not be a Canadian resident. You can see how far down the list it is, but it's one of those things down there. And then limited importance, so basically, if you're down at this level, you must have a pretty weird case if it couldn't be decided based on those ones up there. And then this one, there's kind of a line in here, right? So if you're not in Canada, so this kind of, like the hierarchy ends here. And at this point, you notice this word that we saw before. Basically what they're trying to do is figure out, when you leave, did you mean to leave for good? Anyway, there's the list. In most people's cases, this is non-controversial. Are you a resident? Yeah, it's pretty obvious that you are a resident. But of course, as you might have guessed, we're going to talk about the ones where it's gray. So, in terms of the categories that you can be in any tax year, so in any tax year, every person on the planet, as far as the Canadian Income Tax Act is concerned, is in one of three, you guessed it, buckets. Okay? So what are those three buckets? Well, the first one, obviously, is you are a resident. Okay, and often you'll see this referred to as full-time, but we'll just have that be implied. So you're either a full-time resident, you are a part-year resident, or you are a non-resident. Okay, you cannot be in one of these buckets. You cannot be in more than one of these buckets in any given year. You must be in one of these buckets in any given year. Okay? And it's pretty straightforward. The part year one, you are either, so when you have to go from, to get from one to the other, let's put it this way. So let's have a little dotted line here. To get from being a resident to being a non-resident, you have to go through part year. And in order to do that, you have to make what is called a clean break. Okay, just like the whole relationship analogy, it has to be a clean break. Okay? If you want to go the other way, and you want to go from being a non-resident and go through and become a resident, you have to make a fresh start into Canada. Okay? So again, just like the relationship thing. Okay, so there you go. And when you are a part-year resident, you are, for part of the year, you are a resident. You're considered to be a resident just like anybody else for part of the year, thus the name, and you are a non-resident for the other part. So on the way out, you are resident until you leave, and then you are non-resident for the part after the day you left. Okay? So there you go. That's that. And it's all very straightforward until we get to this one little issue. So in this bucket, we'll make them red, we have this little fish swimming around in this bucket. And this little fish is going to be deemed to jump into this bucket. So what do we call these little fish who cause us all kinds of trouble in this bucket? They are called deemed. I'll just slide this over, resident. Okay? So I'm hoping that the way that I've drawn this picture so expertly shows you that in order to be a deemed resident, you have to first be a non-resident. Okay? There's no deeming of a resident to be a non-resident. You have to be a non-resident, be deemed to be a resident. And when do we deem you to be a resident? Very specific criteria. If you are in Canada, physically present in Canada, and think about how all this electronic stuff is messing this rule up, but if you are in Canada on a temporary basis, which we use the fancy word sojourn so that we can feel a little bit more intelligent. If you are here on a temporary basis for 183 days in aggregate in the year, so 183, so 183 or more, to be clear. It's not like you have to hit it and then it stops. So or more, 183 or more in the year, then you are a deemed resident. And once you are deemed, you are a full-time resident. There's no proration based on the number of days you're here. If you trip this wire, you leave your bucket, your natural non-resident bucket, and you jump all the way over into the resident bucket as far as the act is concerned. Okay? So on this topic, let's just talk about where the action is. So where the action is. What does that mean? It just means what's likely to come up on exams, and really where is all the trouble in the real world. Where the action is really two things. Was a departure a clean break? Okay, so this is where all of the most of the fighting between CRA and taxpayers happens. Is the taxpayer says, I left Canada and therefore you don't have a right to tax me anymore, and CRA says, no, you didn't leave Canada, you just went on a little trip. That's not a clean break. You were always coming back. Again, just like the relationship thing. Okay, so that's always, or almost always, well, it's frequently controversial. And then the last thing, or the other one where the action is the non-resident deemed? But this is not really controversial because it's a pretty clear rule. The only thing that comes up is, were you there, were you not? But really, if the facts are clear, then this is really not that difficult an issue. Okay, so on the slides that I've posted, I've got a couple slides, or at the end I have a slide on common misconceptions. I highly advise you to go there. I want to do my best, as always, but again here, I want to do our best to not be confused by the things that confuse students in this area. It is fairly straightforward, but there are things that are confusing when you first come to it, and so we're going to try to dispel those as best we can, and we'll do the rest in class on the problems.